Lord of Mysteries. My Identities echoes across time chapter 451 to 460. Cough. Klein couldn't help but imagine the scene if everyone around him was actually being impersonated by one person. The thought made him feel a little sympathy for Lynn, who was beside him. After a moment, he said, "At least, I'm not one of his disguises. If you were pretending to be him, you'd be expecting my ending friendship punch right to your face." After joking a bit, Klein sacrificed the Sea King's characteristic to the Saphira castle. Then, through a granting ritual, he transferred the characteristic to the Angel of Secrets who was currently in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. After the divine incarnation of Lynn received the characteristic, he stretched lazily. Multitasking, he controlled the Angel of Secrets to forge the Sea King's characteristic while glancing at the fool, whose spirit had returned to his body from the Saphira castle. Smiling, he said, "Well then, shall we search through this ruin thoroughly and then visit another one?" Another ruin. Klein was momentarily stunned, a bit confused. Yes, the ruin where Calvetua is located is actually closely related to another one. I didn't have the coordinates for that ruin before, so I couldn't take you there directly. Otherwise, we could have even dealt with Calvetua through that place. Lynn sighed, seemingly regretful, but quickly became cheerful again. But now that we're in Calvetua's ruin, I can reverse locate the other. And there's a gift waiting for us there. Lynn finished with a bright smile. The gift he mentioned was, of course, the Book of Calamity, which in the original story was closely tied to the Elven Queen. Lynn wasn't particularly interested in the Elven Queen herself. Although he had perfectly missed the war between the Elven race and the ancient Sun God faction due to his slumber, it would have been easier to explore the remnants of the Elven race in the second epic if he was truly interested in them, rather than doing so after so much time had passed. The reason Lynn wanted the Book of Calamity was simple, to give Alger a side mission. Alger had been working hard at the Tarot Club, constantly filling in the gaps. Since he was set to be a future tool of the Fool's Church, giving him a side quest to strengthen him was only fair, right? Lynn was very benevolent towards his employees, even if they worked for his close friend's company. The fool had no idea his two-faced friend was already planning to strengthen the employees who would be working 24/7 for him in the future. Klein simply observed his surroundings, studying the murals and decorations. After a few seconds, he said, "This seems to be an ancient elven ruin. The gift you mentioned, could it be some kind of resurrection contingency left behind by a powerful elf?" Although Klein hadn't personally witnessed many angels and gods dying and coming back to life, as Bethel's student, he had heard plenty of stories from Mr. Dorr about angels and gods who had died and then returned. Coupled with the fact that Calvetua had obviously gained the Sea King's characteristic from this ruin, Klein had formed some ideas. "Well, you could say that. I'm not entirely sure if it's a contingency for the Queen of Calamity's resurrection, but it doesn't matter. Whatever we take will be ours." Lynn thought for a second, then shrugged nonchalantly. The Queen of Calamity. Klein remembered hearing from Mr. Dorr that she was the wife of the Elf King, the Queen of the Elves. Klein's expression became subtle as he recalled the war between the ancient Sun God faction and the Elven race. "Did she offend you?" he asked. "No, not really. I was asleep during the war between the ancient Sun God faction and the Elves." Lynn shook his head before suddenly smiling brightly. "But my brother was involved. He got badly injured trying to hunt down the Elves, God of Knowledge. No sequence one was easy to hunt, especially not the God of Knowledge, who lived among the elves and had maxed out the Tyrant Pathway's abilities. In a prepared state, the God of Knowledge would have been even harder to kill. Medici had only just ascended to Conqueror at the time and, due to some accidents, didn't even have his army with him. Hunting the prepared God of Knowledge had been far from easy. Of course, Medici eventually won, but he was also seriously injured. Lynn couldn't take revenge on the God of Knowledge, but causing trouble for the Queen of Calamity and stealing some of her things. That, he was more than happy to do. "Ah, I see. So she did offend you in a way." Klein didn't know what to say for a moment, inwardly sympathizing with the unlucky queen. But he decided to thoroughly explore the ruin to see if there were any other rewards. Sympathy aside, the spoils were still there for the taking. Unfortunately, likely due to Calvetua and his minions occupying the ruin for so long, there wasn't much of value left. Klein found only a few scattered objects, the most notable being a crushed golden goblet. Klein deduced that the goblet was likely connected to the Queen of Calamity. Although he wasn't sure of its specific use, he still stored everything in the Saphira castle. Then, with the other elven ruin located through Calvetuas, Lynn invited the fool to join him. They used a scroll imbued with travel abilities to reach the second ruin. This ruin was much smaller than the first but far more delicate and untouched by outside interference. Lynn first cast a protective buff on Klein to shield him from any potential corruption, and then the two of them explored the ruin together. Finally, in the depths of the ruin, they found the Book of Calamity, as described in the original story. Interesting. Lynn casually picked up the Book of Calamity and flipped through it. Normally, anyone touching the book so carelessly would be corrupted, but for Lynn, it was nothing. Not even outer gods could truly corrupt him, let alone something left behind by the Queen of Calamity. The Book of Calamity contained a wealth of information, including details about the elven race and numerous mysterious secrets related to the Tyrant Pathway. The formulas for the various sequences of the Tyrant Pathway were also recorded within. More importantly, upon picking up the Book of Calamity, Lynn could sense a distant space resonating with it. The resonance was incredibly subtle, and if Lynn hadn't spent years with Mr. Door, he might not have even noticed it. End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. This made Lynn glance in that direction, revealing a bright smile. He said, "Your book is great, but after this, it's mine." Lynn didn't care whether the Queen of Calamity could sense what was happening on his side, nor did he pay attention to the reaction of the other party. He then took out a large, square box from his spatial pocket and placed the Book of Calamity inside. This is the sealing box crafted by him, specifically designed to contain items with corruption. With this, not even the Queen of Calamity can manipulate it, Lynn explained as he handed the box containing the Book of Calamity to Klein. But to be safe, it's best to keep it on the gray fog most of the time. That place is a more natural sealing environment. However, if you want to lend it to someone, make sure to keep it sealed within the box. As the essence of Sephiroth, even without a true owner, Saphira Castle was enough to suppress anything below uniqueness, and it might even suppress uniqueness if placed on the gray fog. Does this have anything to do with Mr. Hanged Man? Klein took the sealed box and seemed to have guessed something. It wasn't hard to deduce. The only member of the Tarot Club on the Tyrant Pathway was Mr. Hanged Man. If Lynn didn't care much about the Book of Calamity personally, and had specifically prepared a sealing box that would allow its use under the gray fog, it was likely because the book was connected to someone in the Tarot Club. Not yet, but they should be related, Lynn nodded, not intending to hide this fact. Will there be any danger? Klein frowned slightly. As both the fool and someone who had some rapport with Mr. Hanged Man, Klein naturally didn't want Mr. Hanged Man to be in danger. There's definitely some risk, but with you and me involved, it's within controllable limits, Lynn nodded and gave Klein a glance. And compared to the potential benefits, the risk is worth it. If Mr. Hanged Man wants to ascend to Anglehood without going against the Church of the Storm, this is probably the only viable path. Of course, whether he chooses to take this path is up to him. If he's unwilling to take the risk, it's fine. This is more of a side matter, Lynn shrugged, speaking earnestly. Mr. Hanged Man wasn't Klein, after all. Lynn was willing to pave the way for the fool and push him toward becoming the Lord of Mysteries, but Mr. Hanged Man didn't hold such a high place in Lynn's heart. Opening up a side quest and laying out a path for him was already generous, and Lynn didn't particularly care if the man chose to follow it. Hearing this, Klein nodded thoughtfully and said nothing further. Klein wasn't the type to coddle friends and keep them in a bubble of absolute safety. He knew that sometimes, risks must be taken. Moreover, Mr. Hanged Man was different from other Tarot Club members, not in terms of importance to the fool, but in terms of reliability. If it were other members of the Tarot Club, such as the naive little son or the laid-back magician, the fool would indeed feel worried, given their unreliability. Accidents seemed inevitable with them. But Mr. Hanged Man, along with the now mature Miss Justice, was different. These two had become the reliable pillars of the Tarot Club, so the fool was more at ease with their actions. Thus, the fool simply asked, when? He was naturally asking when to give the Book of Calamity to Mr. Hanged Man. Wait until he reaches sequence 5. It's too early now, and it's best to ensure he'll work for you in the future. Otherwise, why cultivate him for nothing? Lynn stretched lazily and then turned to Klein with a knowing smile. By the way, you can also flip through the book. Although most of it pertains to the sailor pathway, the supplementary knowledge is quite valuable. You can even sell this pathway's potion formulas. Upon hearing this, the fool's eyes immediately brightened. Lynn, meanwhile, suddenly recalled something. Speaking of which, Mr. Hanged Man seems to be looking for the wind-blessed potion formula. You could sell it to him, along with the ocean songster formula. Give him a little surprise, but don't forget to split the money with me. Ahem, isn't that a bit unscrupulous? Klein coughed lightly. How is it unscrupulous? Even though this book is intended for him in the future, it doesn't belong to him yet. I'm not even suggesting we sell the potion formulas separately. Wait, maybe we should sell the formulas to him separately when the time comes. Lynn stroked his chin thoughtfully. Klein instantly gave Lynn a look reserved for capitalists. Haha, just kidding. I'm not that evil. Lynn laughed, then remembered something else. He smiled mysteriously at Klein. Speaking of potion formulas, you still haven't obtained the Bizarro Sorcerer potion formula, have you? Klein hesitated and nodded. Indeed, he hadn't yet acquired the Bizarro Sorcerer potion formula and had no clue where to find it. The Angel of Secrets seemed to have anticipated this and had instructed Mr. Door not to teach him. Well, the Angel of Secrets told me that after you ascend to Puppet Master, he can introduce you to some old friends. At that time, you should be able to get the Bizarro Sorcerer potion formula, Lynn said, his smile growing wider. But he also mentioned that the journey won't be free, you'll need to pay an entrance fee. What kind of entrance fee? Klein suddenly had a bad feeling. There are two options for the entrance fee. The first is to temporarily become a real cat and take a set of cat photos, including but not limited to the full cat, world cat, and various common cat expressions. Lynn raised one finger, then another. The second option is to pay 50,000 gold pounds. Klein opened his mouth, struggling to find his voice for a while. Are you sure the first choice is from the Angel of Secrets and not your personal amusement? Lynn blinked. Would you believe me if I said it's a shared wish between us? I believe you. Klein gritted out through his teeth, his expression conflicted. He knew that obtaining the faceless potion formula through either option was a ridiculously easy task. But cat photos. Was that even real? The fool couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of embarrassment just imagining it. End of chapter. If I were to choose the 50,000 pounds. Klein's brow instinctively furrowed. His rational mind told him that 50,000 pounds for the sequence 4 potion formula was not overpriced, but his wallet disagreed, he simply couldn't afford that kind of money. Do I really have to resort to making cat meme expressions? Mr. Fool hesitated slightly. Then, he heard Lynn suddenly speak up. By the way, Gehrman, do you mind if I invite Mr. Azek over to help? We could recreate the classic big cat and little cat duo. Klein's expression almost cracked. He looked at Lynn with difficulty and finally said, Lynn, show a little humanity. Strictly speaking, it's hard to define if I even am human to have humanity, Lynn corrected jokingly. Seeing Klein's face on the verge of breaking, Lynn finally showed some mercy. But since you're so against it, I won't invite Mr. Azek. Klein let out a sigh of relief but quickly realized what had just happened. He muttered under his breath, I didn't even say I was going to choose the first option. Hearing this, Lynn said nothing, just smiled at him, then glanced at his wallet and shook his head, sighing. He didn't say a word, yet it felt as though he had said everything. Gehrman couldn't help but clench his fists, feeling a surge of determination rise within him. He swore that one day he would make Lynn understand, the god of poverty wouldn't stay poor forever. Enough with this. I'm still terrifying, you know. Klein finally snapped. Ha ha ha. Lynn, showing no shame, burst out laughing. He then patted Klein on the shoulder and said seriously, keep it up, Gehrman. I look forward to the day your cat meme album goes public. This time, Klein's fists tightened for real. While Lynn was busy attempting to coax Mr. Fool into making cat memes, and while Mr. Fool was on the verge of unleashing his friendship-breaking punch, elsewhere, the Angel of Secrets was meticulously crafting with Calvetua's Sea King characteristics. The process didn't take long for the Angel of Secrets, being the finest artisan of the era, aside from artisan. By that evening, the Angel had already handed the newly forged Sea God's scepter over to Mr. Fool. Out of a sense of ritual, the Angel of Secrets shaped this characteristic into a scepter, similar to its original form, but with some differences in ability. The new version of the Sea God's scepter retained most of the abilities once held by the Sea King, allowing its wielder to communicate with followers of the former Sea God, Calvetua. Additionally, it came with an advantage that wasn't present in the original: minimal negative effects. In the original story, the Sea God's scepter was classified as a standard grade 1 sealed artifact due to its severe negative effects. Without Klein's protection through the gray fog, using this artifact could have killed him. However, after the Angel of Secrets modifications, the new scepter's negative effects were much simpler. The wielder would become hot-headed and quick to anger, and the scepter needed to be soaked in blood after each use, though it didn't have to be human blood, livestock blood would suffice. Furthermore, the power to channel the prayers of believers, which was both an ability and a negative effect in the original, was also improved. The wielder could now choose whether or not to accept prayers from followers and could control the amount of prayer channeled, making it safe and manageable. That very night, Mr. Fool donned the mantle of the Sea God, taking on the role in the gray fog for the first time. In the jungles of Blue Mountain Island, within a secret cave that served as one of the rebellion's hidden bases, bald-headed rebel Khaled knelt despairingly in front of the shattered statue of the Sea God, his entire being void of spirit. His reaction was understandable. Since noon, when the statue broke, Khaled had lost contact with the Sea God's high priest, and the god had ceased to respond to prayers. For a devout believer like Khaled, this was akin to the sky falling. He couldn't even lie to himself: he wasn't the only one who had lost the god's favor. The other members of the rebellion had also failed to receive responses. It seemed all signs pointed to one conclusion: something had happened to their god. It was a terrifying thought, one that could drive any Sea God follower to despair. Yet, it wasn't entirely unexpected for Khaled. As a high-ranking member of the Sea God Church, even though he had been exiled to the rebels for rejecting bloody sacrifices, Khaled had long suspected that their god was in decline. But he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly, so suddenly. This left him confused, heartbroken, and despondent. If it weren't for his responsibility to the rebels and the oppressed people of the Rorstad archipelago, Khaled might have considered following his god into death. But he couldn't. If he died, what would happen to the rebels? And what of his fellow countrymen, those who had no means of resisting the oppression of the Loan Kingdom and other foreign powers? But, without our god, can we truly continue to resist? Khaled's sorrowful, confused gaze once again landed on the shattered statue of the Sea God. Then, something caught his eye. He froze, seeing a vague figure, a towering form that seemed to blend into the deep blue waves of the sky and bolts of silver lightning. The figure was majestic, grand, awe-inspiring, and sacred. Khaled was instantly awestruck. He instinctively lowered his head, his heart swelling with incredulous joy. Then, he heard a calm, powerful voice. "I have returned." Above the gray fog, Klein carefully selected a suitable believer from the Sea God cult and proclaimed the Sea God's rebirth. He also issued a new holy covenant, marking the beginning of the Church's reformation. The Sea God cult, having once worshipped the insane serpent Calvetua, had been both primitive and bloody. Now that Klein had taken over, he would not allow such mistakes to continue. With careful restraint and reform, his goal was to transform the Sea God cult into a proper church instead of a cult, and a reputable secret organization that wouldn't be blacklisted by the official churches. End of chapter. This task was not an easy one. Fortunately, the most devout and inhumane followers of the Sea God had already perished with Calvetua. Wearing the Sea God's mask, Klein naturally held authority and intimidation over the remaining followers. Thus, reformation wouldn't be too difficult. However, for those who refused to repent and continued down the path of bloody sacrifices, Mr. Fool would simply send them to meet the Sea God they believed in. Although Klein was kind-hearted, he wasn't a saint without boundaries. For the Sea God Church members who were willing to reform, he would offer leniency and guidance. But for those stubbornly refusing to change, sending them to Calvetua was a fitting end to their faith. After handling the matters of the New Covenant, Klein became curious about the Sea God's scepter and its function of accepting believers' prayers. For Mr. Fool, this was a novel feature, and after some investigation, he connected with a prayer from one of the followers. What Klein saw next was a scene under a bridge, where a ragged girl with multiple festering wounds leaned against a corner, murmuring prayers to the Sea God. The girl, named Buddy, was a native of the Rorstad archipelago. Her parents were devout believers of the Sea God, and thus, she also followed the faith. Buddy once had a family that was not particularly happy but at least bearable. However, 2 years ago, her father died in a road construction accident, and the Rorstad Railway Company gave only minimal compensation. Since then, her life spiraled downward. She was sold by her mother to the Red Theater, where she became a prostitute. Later, she contracted a serious illness and was cast out, becoming a sickly vagrant without work. The only consolation was that her city had a charitable organization that provided her with free food and medicine, allowing her to barely survive and not starve to death under the bridge. But this was only temporary. Charity had its limits, and her illness wasn't one that could be cured with a few free pills. Her life was already on a countdown. She hadn't committed any wrongs, but fate had never been kind to her. If only I could live like a person. In her prayer, Buddy muttered, almost as if talking to herself, expressing her small and fragile wish. She didn't expect a response from the gods. That was too distant for her. She was merely recalling her parents and the words of adventurers and pirates, leading her to instinctively pray to the Sea God, hoping to find a sliver of comfort in her suffering. Above the gray fog, Klein instinctively raised the Sea God's scepter, but he remembered that it didn't have healing abilities. Fortunately, since becoming friends with Lynn, the extravagant Beander who casually tossed scrolls around, Klein had stocked up on various types of scrolls, including those with healing powers. So, he quickly fished out 2 healing scrolls from his miscellaneous pile and used them on Buddy through her prayer light. Under the bridge, in a corner unnoticed by anyone, Buddy's eyes widened as she saw the warm white light enveloping her body. In that moment, all her pain seemed to melt away, replaced by peace and comfort. When the light disappeared, she was shocked to find that her festering wounds had miraculously healed. Her body felt lighter than it had in years, as if she had returned to the days before her downfall. Was this a miracle? Though she wasn't highly educated, after a brief period of shock and disbelief, she remembered her parents and the stories of adventurers and pirates describing the miracles of gods. She instinctively knelt down and, just as she was about to bow her head, a distant yet majestic voice echoed in her ears. Someone will come for you soon. From today onward, you can live like a person. Buddy wanted to look up, to see the sky, to see the great figure speaking to her, but she knew she couldn't. That would be disrespectful to the god. She sat there in a daze until the feeling of being watched completely disappeared. Drip. It seemed like a droplet of water had fallen on her clothes. She instinctively looked up, wondering if it had started raining, but the sun was still shining brightly in the sky. Only then did she belatedly touch her face, realizing that it was already wet with tears. These weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of rebirth. You don't seem to be in a good mood. In the hotel, Lynn looked at Klein, who had just returned from the gray fog, and asked with some confusion. I just feel a bit heavy-hearted. Klein sighed and said, I finally understand why, despite Calvetua's madness and the bloodthirsty practices of the sea god cult, so many people still believe and join. They simply have no other choice. After saving Buddy and arranging for her to be picked up by a nearby member of the resistance and given a proper job, Klein also answered some other believers' prayers. He deeply felt the suffering of the Rorstad archipelago natives and understood the damage colonialism had inflicted on these people. The higher-ups of the sea god cult, who led the bloody sacrifices, certainly deserved death. They had long ceased to be human and never cared for the lower-ranking believers. However, the ordinary sea god followers were largely believers out of desperation. People like Khaled, the bald leader of the resistance, who had received good education and knew the blood sacrifices were wrong, remained with the sea god church because they had no other option, Without the sea god's support, the resistance had no chance against a nation like the Loan Kingdom. In the end, Calvetua didn't truly save them, and the resistance's choice was akin to drinking poison to quench their thirst. But now, they have you, don't they? Lynn smiled as he patted Klein on the shoulder. Mr. Fool is far more reliable than that stupid sea snake. End of chapter. Mr. Fool is far more reliable than that stupid sea snake. I can only say I'll do my best. Klein naturally knew that Lynn was comforting him. He sighed without making any promises but began calculating how he could assist the resistance. He would still restrain the actions of the Sea God Church, preventing them from carrying out those primitive and bloody practices. At the same time, he would also help the rebels resist the colonizers who oppressed them. Seeing Mr. Fool deep in thought, Lynn couldn't help but smile and said, "Actually, you can talk to the Church of Storms about this. Don't forget, Archbishop Cotman received a divine message to fully support us. This could naturally include supporting the Sea God Church after everything is over. In the end, the Church doesn't care whether the rulers of the Rosid Archipelago are from Loan Kingdom or the local population. Their only concern is faith. In the past, the Sea God Church had no backing and was competing with the Church of Storms for believers. So naturally, the Storm Church suppressed them. But now that we have their backing, we can negotiate." Klein's eyes lit up at first, but he hesitated. But the Sea God Church will still compete with the Church of Storms for believers in the future. It's fine. They will accept it grudgingly. Lynn patted Klein on the shoulder. Besides, we're not trying to push the faith of Storms out of the Rosid Archipelago. It's just that each church will compete to spread their teachings in their own way. Klein glanced at Lynn after hearing this. Although Lynn didn't explain why the Lord of Storms would have to tolerate it, Klein recalled what Mr. Dorr had mentioned about Lynn's past deeds. In that moment, Klein understood something. I hope the Lord of Storms is fine. While praying for Lord of Storm, Klein's brain was also working fast, thinking about how to approach the Storm Church for negotiations. He wasn't naive enough to think that with the support of the Storm Church, the resistance could immediately defeat the Loan military and achieve their goal of self-governance for the Rosid Archipelago. After all, the Loan military wasn't weak, and the Storm Church didn't have complete control over Loan's actions. Klein couldn't expect the Storm Church to outright oppose the Loan military either. Not suppressing the rebels and offering some aid was probably the most they could hope for. But no matter what, this would be much better than their original situation, essentially removing one of the two major obstacles in their way. As it turned out, Lynn's assessment was correct. Even though the Lord of Storms followers might have been inwardly frustrated enough to want to smite someone with lightning, when Klein and Lynn explained their intentions, not a single bolt came down. Klein's own assumptions were also accurate. After hearing their proposal, the Church of Storms grudgingly agreed to let the Sea God Church grow and spread its teachings legally. They also agreed to provide some assistance to the resistance and the Sea God Church. However, when it came to the question of returning the Rosid Archipelago to the local people for self-governance, the Church were clear in their response. If you can get the governor's office to back down, the Rosid Archipelago will be yours. Otherwise, unless you want the Storm Church to go to war with the Loan military, I can't decide this alone, Archbishop Cotman said coldly. If emotions could affect the temperature, the area around him would have frozen solid. This wasn't surprising. For Cotman, not only had he lost what he thought was a sure thing, but now he was being asked to help the Sea God Church compete with his own for believers and to support the rebels against Loan's colonizers. Honestly, it was as if they were asking him to stab himself. The fact that he hadn't already struck them down with lightning was a sign of his self-restraint. Jan Cotman's statement wasn't merely to make things difficult for them either. Unlike in the original storyline, where the Loan military had been significantly weakened by the death of George III and the ensuing war, the current Loan military and monarchy, while still weaker than the major churches, were far from powerless. They had nearly installed a Black Emperor, after all. Given the circumstances, while the Storm Church held significant influence in the Rosid Archipelago, Archbishop Cotman couldn't entirely ignore the Loan military unless the two sides were ready for an all-out confrontation. The governor's office of the Rosid Archipelago, Lynn rubbed his chin thoughtfully, as if recalling something amusing. Actually, I wouldn't mind paying them a visit. I wonder if the bitch tree is also looking to have a child with me. What are you even talking about? Klein gave Lynn a peculiar look. Lynn glanced at him, then laughed and patted Klein's shoulder. Don't look at me like that. You almost fathered a child with it yourself. Klein. Klein. Even though Lynn's words were cryptic, Klein quickly understood that he was referring to something that might have happened in the original timeline. And because he understood, Klein found himself feeling genuinely creeped out. Ha ha ha. Lynn laughed loudly before looking at Cotman, who was frowning and giving them a look that seemed to say, what nonsense are you talking about? Lynn smiled and said, but for the sake of a certain evil god's well-being, I'll stay out of it. However, Mr. Cotman, you might want to warn Admiral Amirius to watch out for the little cult his lover follows. They worship a genuine evil god. Hearing this, Archbishop Cotman's frown deepened. Lynn didn't offer any further explanation, only smiled. He wasn't planning to meet with Admiral Amirius personally. After all, unlike Archbishop Cotman, Amirius didn't have the authority to decide whether the Rosid archipelago should be returned to its people. That decision rested with the higher-ups in the Loan military, or even the Loan monarchy. In fact, if Cotman were only thinking of his own interests, he probably wouldn't have had the authority to decide either. But with the Lord of Storms himself grudgingly allowing it, there were no further obstacles from that side. Lynn's solution was simple. Since the decision was in the hands of the Loan monarchy, he would go directly to them to settle the matter. After all, he was planning to cause trouble for them anyway. End of chapter. Lynn had a brilliant idea, to take advantage of the 2 months before the Great Smog event in the original story. Using the time flow difference, he planned to make several trips to the Russell era and help Klein digest the marionettist potion. Ideally, during these 2 months, he'd also try to bring Russell back. That way, when the royal family tries to initiate the Great Smog to cover their crimes, the real Black Emperor Russell could appear and give the Augustus family a harsh reality check. At the same time, Klein could directly kill the Despair to complete his ritual for advancing to the Bizarro Sorcerer sequence. How satisfying would that be? Of course, considering the danger posed by the Despair, we could teleport both her and Klein to a deserted area beforehand. Then, we can weaken the witch with a debuff and stack multiple buffs on Klein. After all, the original novel proved that the Bizarro Sorcerer ritual only requires the direct killing of a sequence 4, without prohibiting outside help or using magical artifacts. Lynn calculated in his mind, the only issue is the audience for the ritual. But if Adam could replace the required audience in the original story, there's no reason I can't bring in a group of big shots to do the same. If worse comes to worst, I'll just pull Adam over since he's always ready to appear from thin air. As for whether Adam would want to be the audience, Lynn felt confident he would. Thinking about this, Lynn glanced at a patch of air and then nonchalantly looked away. Are you thinking something strange? Klein suddenly shivered, giving Lynn a suspicious look, clearly very familiar with this kind of situation by now. Not at all. Lynn shook his head, blinking his innocent eyes. He was earnestly thinking about how to solve Mr. Fool's Bizarro Sorcerer advancement ritual. How could that be considered strange? Klein cast a doubtful glance at Lynn but eventually looked away. I'll inform Admiral Amirius of what you said. Archbishop Cotman spoke at this moment, his gaze sweeping over the two of them as they laughed and joked, completely ignoring him. His anger boiled within, but he couldn't show it. His expression grew even colder as he asked, anything else? Dinner is almost ready. Would the esteemed Archbishop Cotman mind having a meal with the two of us? Lynn thought for a few seconds before flashing a radiant smile. Archbishop Cotman. I mind very much. Leave at once. Was what he wanted to say. You're welcome to stay. Cotman took a deep breath and left those words behind as he turned around with a swirl of his cloak, walking away briskly. It was clear that if he stayed any longer, his anger might really explode. Tisk, 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 his self-control is still lacking compared to the Lord of Storms, though they're about on the same level. Lynn gave his commentary. It seems like you're deliberately provoking him. Klein finally caught on. Not really, but when there's such an easily angered pigeon in front of you, wouldn't it be a waste not to tease him a little? Lynn shrugged, acting totally righteous. Klein's mouth twitched. So, in your eyes, what exactly is the Church of Storms? Have they been downgraded to the point where you describe them with animal metaphors? Mr. Fool didn't quite understand, but that didn't stop him from joining Lynn for a free dinner at the Church of Storms. Truth be told, though Jan Kottman had a fiery temper, his generosity was commendable. Instead of offering them a simple, inedible dinner as revenge, he had served a rather nice feast. Afterward, Lynn even expressed a desire to pack some leftovers and promised to come back next time. A few days later. I think Archbishop Kottman never wants to see you again in his life. Standing on the deck of the future, Klein gazed at the distant black dot that was the city of generosity, sighing from the bottom of his heart. By now, Klein had already arranged matters for the Sea God Church and the resistance on the Rorstad archipelago. Over the course of several meetings with Archbishop Kottman after that dinner, he witnessed Lynn repeatedly and deliberately provoke the Storm's church leader. Honestly, even Mr. Fool felt that the fact Jan hadn't summoned lightning to strike Lynn dead was a testament to the man's immense restraint. Be more confident. It's us. He doesn't want to see either of us, Lynn responded without a hint of guilt, confidently patting Klein on the shoulder. Besides, don't you think teasing a pigeon is really fun? Klein recalled how, over the past few days, Archbishop Kottman had been on the verge of exploding but was forced to suppress his temper, and suddenly found himself silent. You know what? It is kind of fun. Cough. Lynn was not at all surprised by Klein's reaction. After all, while Mr. Fool was known for his serious, cautious nature, he still had a mischievous streak. Why else would he have played pranks under the guise of Merlin during his miracle invoker phase? Unlike Amon, whose antics often crossed moral lines and endangered lives, Klein's pranks typically served as life lessons for those who deserved them. Still, the fact remained, Mr. Fool did have a playful side. And Lynn certainly didn't mind encouraging it. Much like how he'd once led Bethel into mischief in the fourth epic, there was nothing quite like finding entertainment with a friend. Witnessing all of this from the sidelines, Danitz was at a loss for words. He knew nothing. He said nothing. If, a few days ago, Danitz still harbored a faint hope of leaving the Church of the Fool, that hope had now completely evaporated. After witnessing this series of absurd events, he had begun to look forward to the future, though he was also vaguely worried about his own well-being. Somehow, he felt like his days ahead would be filled with endless challenges. As for Catalya, who had also been present for the entire incident, she was already numb. She cleared her throat to draw everyone's attention and calmly said, I've directed the future to head towards the Mermaid's Sea as quickly as possible. If nothing unexpected happens, we'll arrive in 3 days. Normally, the journey from the Rorstad archipelago to the Mermaid's route would take over a week. But Catalya was desperate to get these two guests to their destination as soon as possible. She was even willing to use some of the more dangerous methods of navigation she rarely employed. May the Queen Mystic bless me, and may I deliver these two of them to the mermaid swiftly. Catalya prayed fervently in her heart. End of chapter. In the fifth epic, Catalya was pushing the accelerator to the floor, eager to send the two guests to the route of the mermaids that very night. Meanwhile, in the second epic, Lynn had finally fully digested the sage potion. He had also prepared the ritual for his promotion to Knowledge Emperor and was ready to officially consume the potion and advance to Sequence 1. In the Grand Hall, Lynn raised the potion in his hand. Its main color was pale gold, appearing as if it held countless secrets and knowledge within. With a slight frown of distaste, he muttered, it looks like it would be hard to swallow. Why can't the potions for the Mystery Prior pathway taste as good as the ones from the Spectator pathway? He suddenly remembered a mention in the original text that the potions for the Spectator pathway were supposedly not bad. So, the Spectator pathway is really unfair. It's already versatile and powerful, but even the potions taste good. I guess it's time to nerf them. Lynn muttered in a low voice, making a joke only he would understand. Are you some kind of princess who feels a pee under her mattress? Dragging your feet even when it comes to drinking a potion. Want me to get you some candy? Medici, who was lazily leaning against the wall in a corner of the hall, looked up at his finicky brother, teasing him with a smirk. As for the princess remark, that was from a fairy tale Lynn used to tell the young Medici. If you need candy, I actually have some. Standing silently in another corner, Saussure spoke up, even going so far as to dig into his pocket and pull out a variety of flavored candies. Ha ha ha. Medici couldn't help but laugh out loud at this. So, Lynn, you're really a 3-year-old baby, huh? Want me to sing you a lullaby too? Lynn smiled and glanced at him, devoid of any killing intent, but his gaze clearly conveyed the message, I'll deal with you later. After warning his troublesome little brother, Lynn turned to Saussure, accepting the candy without any hesitation. He didn't eat it right away but asked curiously, why do you carry candy with you, Saussure? He's been busy settling the people we rescued from the dragons and giants. I imagine the candy is to comfort the children. Medici, still lounging, clearly had a good grasp of many details. Lynn suddenly understood. He glanced at Saussure's increasingly dark eye circles, then said, I know you're busy with important matters, but take care of yourself. It's not worth pushing your body too far. It's fine, this level of fatigue is nothing to me. Saussure shook his head, showing a gentle smile. Besides, I believe everything will soon come to an end. Peace isn't too far away. They were about to launch an operation against the Giant King right after Lynn's promotion. And once the Giant King fell, dealing with the dragons would be much simpler. Victory was within their grasp. Isn't it possible that the end of the war might just mean more work for you? Lynn didn't refute Saussure's words about the impending peace, but instead, he raised an eyebrow and presented another possibility. He also believed that the ancient sun god faction's victory was only a matter of time. But the key issue was that even if they won, Saussure would still be stuck in his role. Managing the expanding divine kingdom wouldn't stop. After all, besides Saussure, there wasn't really anyone else who could shoulder the burden of running the vast divine kingdom. Even though many capable individuals had been cultivated, there would still be a significant shortage of talent as their territories expanded after the war. While the gaps would eventually be filled, until then, Saussure was bound to be overworked. Saussure's smile froze momentarily, clearly realizing this as well. He exhaled and said, when that time comes, I might consider taking a long vacation and having the Lord cover for me for a while. Lynn's eyes lit up immediately, looking at Saussure as if to say, you've finally figured it out. Then he burst out laughing, his smile bright and hopeful, showing off a perfect set of 8 white teeth. Don't worry. When that day comes, I'll personally help you push the sun god into the office chair. Medici had been silently watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but shake his head. He'd realized that this once reliable servant of the Lord, Saussure, had been thoroughly corrupted by Lynn. There was no saving him now. The Lord probably wouldn't even want him back. Of course, the same applied to Medici himself. Unconcerned with what his little brother was thinking, Lynn felt relieved to see Saussure's change in attitude. Then, he finally remembered the task at hand. He glanced back at the golden potion, took a deep breath, and downed it. Medici had been lazily reclining, immediately stood up straight, his eyes sharpening with seriousness. Saussure, too, focused intently on Lynn. The reason they were present at Lynn's promotion to Knowledge Emperor wasn't merely to watch, they were also there to prevent any accidents. If something went wrong, they were responsible for rescuing Lynn to avoid irreversible consequences. Their caution was understandable. In a world where madness and distortion governed the underlying rules, the risks of advancing from Sequence 2 to Sequence 1 were immense. Even though Lynn had theoretically perfectly digested the sage potion and had prepared the promotion ritual to the Knowledge Emperor beyond expectations, the risk of losing control still loomed. Fortunately, Lynn was no ordinary Beander. For someone who had already mastered Sequence 0 abilities before advancing to Sequence 1, the challenge of going from Sage to Knowledge Emperor was hardly an obstacle. Soon enough, Lynn opened his eyes, having flawlessly absorbed the characteristics of the Knowledge Emperor. His body, which had been in an information state, reformed into a human shape. He blinked a few times, then thoughtfully said, why did my Knowledge Emperor potion melt in my mouth? Yes, despite just advancing to Knowledge Emperor, Lynn noticed that his potion had completely dissolved upon contact with his tongue. In theory, given his current state, as long as he completed the Sequence 0 ritual, he could immediately drink the potion and ascend to godhood. But why did it happen like this? Although the Eye of Secrets had indeed influenced many things, almost ruling the Divine Kingdom's educational sector and making me a well-known authority over knowledge, when you think about it, it wasn't that surprising after all. Lynn thought of Klein from the original story and how his potion for the seer pathway had also dissolved instantly. Suddenly, Lynn felt that his potion's behavior was perfectly normal. Maybe it wasn't entirely the Eye of Secrets. It could also be related to all the knowledge I've mastered, or even, Lynn pondered the nature of his true self. While the mystery prior pathway might not be directly connected to his true self, unlike the relationships between Lord of Mysteries and God Almighty pathways, there was no denying that his true self had control over knowledge. Even as a mere avatar of his true self, it made sense that he would share certain characteristics of knowledge. End of chapter. At least I can confirm that this isn't a bad thing. But why is it that, even though the power I control is the same, the Lord of Mysteries and God Almighty are different from the demon of knowledge? Why am I unaffected by following this path? Lynn couldn't help but mutter in his heart. Or is the problem not about how much power the true body possesses, but a deeper conceptual issue? Perhaps the concepts behind the Lord of Mysteries and God Almighty are inherently tied to the true body. Lynn frowned in thought but couldn't figure it out after pondering for a long time. So, he temporarily buried the question deep within his mind. He then stretched and glanced at Saussure, who seemed relieved, flashing a bright smile. Saussure, let's go enjoy the Giant King's loot next. Giant King's Court. Unlike its decline in later times, the Giant King's Court still flourished. Though it didn't have a decisive advantage in the war against the ancient sun god, it was still a dominant force in the world. Badhale walked through the vast corridors of the Giant King's Court, which seemed overwhelmingly large for an ordinary person. He glanced at the familiar palace surroundings, but his gaze remained indifferent. To him, the court where he had lived for centuries wasn't so much a home as it was a cage. As the eldest son of the giant King Ormir, Badhale should have respected and revered his father, and he should have earned the respect and love of the giants. But the truth was, he neither loved his father nor had ever received his father's love. As for the respect and adoration of the giants, he once had that, but it vanished with the birth of his youngest brother. The gods were chaotic, mad, and dangerous. They were emotionless monsters, or so he had always believed, for his father, Ormir, the giant king, fit that description. As the giant king's eldest son, Badhale was born during his father's most deranged period, and he witnessed his father's most insane actions. Thus, he had long since stopped seeking his father's affection. Perhaps he had held a few fleeting fantasies in his early years, but over the endless centuries, those naive and laughable hopes had long since withered away. He once believed his father would always remain this way, mad, emotionless, until the eventual destruction that might come. But later, he realized he was wrong. When his father began to cast off the undesirable traits, bit by bit, and reclaimed a sliver of clarity from the madness, he saw that his father was capable of love. His father loved those two long-dead mortals, sealed in the forbidden coffin deep within the palace, even refusing Badhale, his son, from approaching their remains, despite Badhale perhaps being their grandson by blood. His father loved the youngest son, born after reclaiming some semblance of emotion, albeit a meager amount of love. He also loved the giant kingdom he had built, even if his affection was perhaps just for the enjoyment it brought him. Perhaps he even loved his mother, despite almost killing her in his madness. In that moment, Badhale was almost stunned to realize his father loved many things, everything except him. Why? He had pondered this question, eventually concluding that he was simply unlucky. Unlucky to have been born during his father's maddest period, unlucky to witness his father's most frenzied actions, and thus unlucky enough to become the child his father did not love. Fortunately, Badhale did not love him either. As he thought this, he couldn't help but glance at the sky. It was nearing twilight. The golden and red hues blending together painted a breathtaking scene, and he found himself momentarily entranced. Twilight seemed about to end. Your Highness Badhale, are you here to see His Majesty? A guard at the palace entrance reminded him, pulling Badhale from his thoughts. As usual, he flashed a hearty smile. I have urgent matters to discuss with my father. Please, go in. The guard naturally wouldn't dare to stop him. Even if he wasn't the giant king's favored son, as the eldest in a sequence one hand of God, Badhale still held considerable status. Thus, he easily entered the familiar palace. Deep within the palace, Ormir, the giant king, sat, drinking. What are you here for? Ormir glanced at Badhale, his tone indifferent. But the next second, Ormir's expression changed drastically, his face twisting in anger and surprise as if he had just discovered something shocking. How dare you! Before he could finish, the tranquil darkness of the night and the blazing light of the sun simultaneously appeared within the palace, enveloping Ormir. It turned out that Badhale had not come alone. Alongside him were several others, concealed by the power of night, none other than the Evernight goddess and the ancient sun god. Father, you're old now. And I'm done with this cage. Badhale spoke as he watched the gods before him clash. There was no doubt he had betrayed the giant King Ormir. As for when this betrayal was born, perhaps it was when the sun god approached him, or maybe it was even earlier, when him realized that his father could love, just not him. But Badhale no longer sought his father's love. Now, he only wanted to consume the remaining characteristics of the Hand of God and its uniqueness, becoming the next Twilight Giant. He would protect his mother, but as for his other siblings in this giant nation, what did they have to do with him? They had never loved him. Badhale thought coldly. Meanwhile, as the battle raged within the giant king's palace, other giant gods who had sensed the situation immediately set out to assist their king. But before they could reach him, they were intercepted by their own opponents. Hello there, sir. I've just ascended to the rank of Knowledge Emperor, and I'm a little itchy to test my skills. Would you mind being my punching bag? Lynn grinned brightly at the giant deity before him. End of chapter. As an ancient god who dominated the second epic, the strength of the giant King Ormir cannot be underestimated. However, no matter how powerful he was no match for the ancient sun god, who had already defeated the Elven King, claimed the uniqueness of the Tyrant Pathway, obtained the characteristic of the Thunder God, and was in possession of the Sea of Chaos, having even touched the threshold of becoming a Great Old One. Especially since the ancient sun god had the Evernight goddess Amon aiding him, and Ormir was backstabbed by his own son, Badhale. This made the already unbalanced scales tip further in favor of the ancient sun god. As a result, the War of Gods didn't last long before it came to an end, and the giant King Ormir officially fell. Sun God, remember your promise. The Evernight goddess Amon clearly had no intention of staying longer. After the fall of the giant King Ormir, she immediately chose to withdraw. The reason was simple, there was another battlefield where her help was needed. However, it wasn't to fight but to use her authority over concealment to accomplish certain tasks. Thinking of what Lilith was about to do, the Evernight goddess Amon glanced briefly at Badhale, who was gazing at the corpse of the giant King Ormir in a daze. She turned around and quickly left the palace that had once belonged to Ormir. The ancient sun god watched the Evernight goddess's departing figure in silence. He then turned to Badhale and smiled, saying, as promised, the uniqueness and characteristic of the Twilight Giant belong to you. This is the uniqueness of the Hermit Pathway. After Badhale, having inherited his father's legacy, left with his belated mother, Lynn and his companions naturally arrived at the palace of the giant King Ormir. Lynn received the Hermit Pathway's uniqueness from the ancient sun god. Unlike later times, when the uniqueness mysteriously developed a personality, the current Hermit Pathway's uniqueness, although slightly active, had yet to reach the level of the later Hermit. The only thing that caught Lynn's attention was the faint aura he sensed lingering around it. Though the aura was faint, and most people might overlook it, Lynn, having dealt with Saphira Castle and the Sea of Chaos for many years, was certain that the aura entangled with the uniqueness came from a Sephiroth. Based on his speculations from the original work, it was most likely from the Knowledge More, which belongs to the Hermit and Paragon pathways. So, the emergence of the Hidden Sage was indeed related to the corruption of the Sephiroth, Lynn thought, nodding in understanding. Although the aura was still too weak to cause significant changes, just as Bansi Harbor had changed due to the invasion of the City of Calamity, Lynn knew that as the seal on the western continent weakened over time, the Hermit Pathway's uniqueness and its connection to the Knowledge More would only grow stronger, eventually developing a personality due to the corruption. Others might hesitate to absorb this uniqueness, knowing that Sephiroth can be both a blessing and a curse. After all, even Medici had to avoid Bansi Harbor in the original story. If a Beyonder could perfectly absorb the Sephiroth, it would be a great boon. But if not, they could be corrupted by it or, like the ancient sun god, trigger the revival of an original. Lynn even suspected that Klein's ability to perfectly adapt to Saphira Castle was due to his status as a vessel for the resurrection of the celestial worthy, along with the many years he had spent marinating in the influence of the castle. For anyone else, it would be like the ordinary people who came into contact with Beyonder characteristics. Those with good luck became Beyonders, while those without either lost control or exploded. Do you intend to absorb the Hermit Pathway's uniqueness now? The ancient sun god suddenly asked with his usual gentle smile. Of course. Now that I have it, it would be a waste not to. Lynn tossed the uniqueness in his hand lightly and smiled brightly. Besides, I'm curious what will happen to the hidden sage once I absorb it. Do you need my assistance? The ancient sun god offered again. Though he hadn't yet fully accumulated the visionary and white tower pathway's uniqueness from the dragon's side, his control over the Sea of Chaos allowed him to help others forcibly absorb uniqueness to some extent. No need. I've already completed the ritual to absorb the hermit pathway's uniqueness. Or rather, for me, there's no need for a ritual to absorb it. Lynn shook his head, his gaze distant as he looked at the uniqueness in his hand. If he had only suspected before when the Knowledge Emperor potion melted on his tongue, now that he held the Hermit Pathway's uniqueness in his hand, Lynn was certain. Even without relying on his original body's power, he had some unique traits. These traits allowed him to absorb the Knowledge Emperor potion instantly and would now allow him to absorb the Hermit Pathway's uniqueness without needing any ritual. Because he was the Lord of Knowledge, the natural apex of this pathway. Nothing could change that fact. Not even if he severed his connection with his original body. Lynn was even sure that if he were to drink a hermit potion now, he could instantly become a true hermit. But thinking about it, I'm a complex blend. I have innate abilities related to time, like creating alternate accounts in different eras. On top of that, I have knowledge-related traits. The only thing missing is spatial abilities, but doesn't that make me a miniature version of my true self? Lynn mused, smiling as he thought about it. After all, he was just a small version of his true self. But I still want to be an independent little bubble. Lynn murmured softly, then decided to absorb the hermit pathway's uniqueness. For others, absorbing a uniqueness might feel like risking their life, but in Lynn's hands, it was as obedient as a toy. With his command, it merged with him as easily as a fish entering water, blending seamlessly with his Knowledge Emperor traits and becoming a part of his power. At that moment, Lynn felt the pull of time and space. It wasn't from his true self but from his main account in the fifth epic. As expected, once I reach sequence 0, or even now after absorbing the uniqueness, returning to my main account would only take a thought, Lynn noted, unsurprised by the fact. What interested him more was something else. He finally had a new Smurf account slot and could create another persona in a new time period. This time, he could even more accurately choose the era for his next Smurf account. End of chapter. Unlike creating a new Smurf account out of thin air before, this time Lynn needed to send over his old Smurf account directly or, more accurately, allow his accustomed Smurf account to exist simultaneously in both the old and new timelines. To simplify, it's essentially about creating a new Smurf account in a new era. However, that Smurf account would inherit the abilities and identity of the old one. The new Smurf account's abilities would be influenced by the old one. If the old Smurf account became a god, the new one could synchronize this power, and vice versa. Of course, since the new and old Smurf accounts are fundamentally the same, there wouldn't be any issues when they finally merge back into the main account. Let me think. Currently, the timelines that need an Smurf account the most are the pre-epic era and Russell's era. The most efficient, by far, would still be Russell's era since I need time to transform the Church of the Steam and Machinery into my own church. It's not like I can count on just a bit of travel time to achieve that, especially considering I still need to rescue Russell. After a few seconds of thought, Lynn made up his mind. He then snapped his fingers. It's decided. I'll pull the Emperor back before he goes to the moon, and I'll have him work for me to reform the Church of Steam and Machinery. Snap. In another timeline, Lynn's new Smurf account opened his eyes. He blinked and easily adapted to the familiar, new, Smurf account, then absorbed some background information that came with it. The Smurf account Lynn was currently using was, of course, his old Smurf account, the Angel of Secrets, and he was located in Intis, Russell's homeland. Right now, it was only 10 minutes before Russell would launch himself to the moon. Lynn. Seriously. Was it necessary to cut the timing so close? A slight delay, and Russell would have been gone. Clearly, my powers still lack finesse, Lynn muttered inwardly as he used the space manipulation abilities he had learned from Mr. Door to locate Russell's position. This wasn't hard for him. While Lynn didn't know the Russell of this era, he was more than familiar with the aura of Russell from another timeline. So, on a tall tower that had already been cleared of others, Russell, dressed in a spacesuit forged by Beyonder powers and holding a sealed artifact from the door pathway, was preparing to physically launch himself into space. Just then, he felt a chilling sensation. Before Russell could react to the source of the unease, the space around him was sealed. A stranger appeared before him, smiling brightly. Yo, Russell. Long time no see. Are you planning on heading to space? Lynn greeted in fluent Chinese as he sealed the space to prevent Russell from escaping. I'd advise against it unless you want to have a bunch of children with the mother goddess of depravity. Oh, wait, I mean a lot of children. Since Russell was already an angel of sequence 2, Lynn didn't bother hiding information about the outer gods. He spoke quite casually. Upon hearing his native language, Russell was stunned for a moment. He then suspiciously and warily eyed Lynn, saying, I don't recall meeting you before. What's this about a mother goddess of depravity? At this point in time, you indeed don't know me, but that's okay. You'll know me sooner or later, whether in the past or future, Lynn said with a relaxed smile. As for the mother goddess of depravity, she's one of the outer gods. Lynn proceeded to explain the concept of the outer gods to Russell, concluding with, in the original future, you would have launched yourself into space today, only to become the plaything of the mother goddess of depravity. You can imagine what that entails. Not even death would have saved you. Russell's mind buzzed. While this was his first time hearing about outer gods, he could tell that Lynn wasn't lying. As Lynn spoke, Russell could feel a gaze from the stars. However, as an angel, Russell wasn't immediately corrupted by that gaze. But, having confirmed the truth of Lynn's words, Russell felt a headache coming on, like a hero ambushed by the Demon King just after leaving the novice village. Aside from this, what piqued Russell's interest most was something else. He suspiciously asked, what do you mean by the original future? It means exactly what it sounds like, Lynn responded with a smile. Allow me to introduce myself. Lynn Sotos, Angel of Secrets, a being that exists in the past, present, and future. I know the future you, and I promised him I would change your fate of being corrupted. That's why I'm here. Russell's expression immediately shifted to one of disbelief. If the situation weren't so dire, he would have cursed out loud. Lynn, unfazed by Russell's skepticism, smiled and said, of course, since you might not trust me, I've learned a few of your past secrets to prove my knowledge. For example, Lynn proceeded to recount some of Russell's most embarrassing childhood memories, like the time he wet the bed at age 8 and tried to blame it on his little cousin, or when he cried all night after being rejected by a girl at age 12. With each revelation, Russell's expression darkened, as though he might die of embarrassment. Of course, if this isn't enough to convince you, I can always mention something else, like the diaries you're writing right now. Oh, and maybe I could read them aloud to Bernadette. Enough. Russell, struck at his core, couldn't take it anymore. His face was as grim as if he had faced death itself. Through gritted teeth, he spat, I believe you. That's great to hear. Lynn smiled, looking at Russell, who clearly wanted to punch him but was holding back. He continued, and don't even think about ambushing me later. I'm the one who does the ambushing around here. Oh, by the way, the last person I ambushed was the eternal blazing sun. I turned him into a punching bag. Perhaps you'd like to try. Lynn spoke with a playful tone, almost egging Russell on. Russell silently compared his own strength to the eternal blazing sun and then considered his current sealed abilities. Finally, he forced a smile and said, you're overthinking it. I don't have such interests. But I do. Lynn quipped. In a flash, he appeared beside Russell, patting his shoulder. So let's go ambush the god of steam and machinery next. After that, you and he can work for me. I've been waiting for you to start the 24/7 work routine for a long time. Russell silently questioned everything. End of chapter.